This is our 10.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay to our fireside chat. We had some technical difficulties, classic UK time, CET hours, and it took us a while to get back online, but here we are. So thank you for joining our series on scaling business in Europe. Today, we are talking about how to launch and expand your company, particularly technology companies in the UK. My name is Rick Pizzoli. I'm the leader of Salesforce Europe. We are a sales agency helping technology companies land and expand in Europe. We've been doing so for about 20 years. We've helped about 500 companies. On the call with me today is Gavin Page, our CRO and country manager for the UK, with years of experience of helping companies scale their business in the UK. Over to you, Gavin.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Rick, on the years of experience. 34 of them, I think, were the last count, although I try not to admit it too often, to be honest. So yeah, based just north of London, everybody. Worked in the UK in the tech industry for, as Rick said, 30 plus years, and scaling businesses, first in territory, all the way up to working for large corporates as well. So good tech background, basically.
So Gavin, you've been at 35 years. We've been working together over 10 years.
Yep.
The first question that people ask is, why the UK? Like, why should people choose the UK for a launching pad into Europe? Or if you're, let's say, scaling your business from a European scale up, why should they choose the UK for a target market?
I mean, there's several reasons, and the one that really it always boils down to is the language. The commonality of the English language means that we're a target for the US businesses, but at the same time, we're an easy entry for European businesses moving across to the US as well. So I think the lack of language barrier is a major one. We're a very open environment. We can talk about VC funding and things like that, and we should probably cover some of those areas as well, Rick. But to be honest, there's a lack of regulatory restriction here, which helps. And whilst as a market, we're fairly conservative as buyers, we're actually very open to technology. You know, when you look at things like e-commerce, we were one of the fastest growing e-commerce environments in the world, just because the size of the country and the adoption of the technology. So I think we are open, even if conservative, and we are heavily supported by government backing, funding, etc., and a lack of regulatory environment that allows a lot of companies to come here quite easily.
Now, English friendly, I mean, everybody knows that. And everybody would say, oh, I'm a Spanish company, I'm an American company, we're English first. Let's land in the UK first. Does that make for a competitive market? And if so, how do you get around that?
Sorry, in terms of the language barrier, or you think?
Yeah, if everybody's going to the UK first, does that make it competitive? I mean, if you're targeting, how do you specialize? How do you then overcome that if you have competition entering the UK market?
Yeah, I wish I had a silver bullet to the second part of that question. But you're right. I mean, obviously, we are a highly competitive market. I mean, there's two benefits to that. One is it's often a tested market for a piece of technology. So you're not always the one forging the message, looking for the early adopters. You're often coming into a market that might be slightly more established. The downside of that is that you've got to have a very clear differentiation for your product. You've got to understand what your unique selling point is. And you've got to remember that you may not be selling into a greenfield environment. You might be selling to somebody who's a second or third generation buyer of a piece of technology. And you've got to therefore articulate what your difference is, but also why that difference not only provides a return on investment, but covers the cost of change or the risk of change within that. So as long as you're very clear with those messages, whilst it is a competitive market, it doesn't mean that you can't be successful here.
And have you seen people be successful from selling from abroad into the UK if they're, an English fluent team?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, when you look at European companies coming into the UK in particular, language is not a massive barrier here. certainly an accent is not a massive barrier here. We're a very multicultural country in reality. And if you are a technology company in particular, I mean, that's partly what we're talking about. I mean, around about sort of 70% of our business, Rick, as you know, is technology based. English is the language of technology. So we have a lot of companies coming out of France, out of Italy, out of Germany, who are easily able to come here and have the supporting documentation, have that supporting language capability. Now, that's often easier than, for example, coming out of the UK for an American company that's maybe landed here and then looks at France or looks at Germany. If they don't have that local language support, it's not enough just to have a lead generation person who books a meeting in German or French, and then you hold the meeting in English. You know, you have to go further with any culture in terms of demonstrating that you're serious about that market. And I think that's probably easier to do in the UK. And we see that definitely with a lot of the companies we work with when we're launching them in the UK, that they're already, you know, language ready. And often culturally, the fit is not a massive difference for them.
Okay. And what about the ecosystem? How does it look these days for VC funding and other partnerships, channels, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're still a significantly tech-focused hub for Europe. I mean, 2025 has been the best since 2022. That was a bumper year for all tech investment across everywhere. You know, we're at our highest rate since then. The last count I read was just over 17 billion in the first 3 quarters of this year. Now, what's interesting is how that compares with the rest of Europe. I mean, Germany and France are the 2 second biggest, and they're 9 billion combined. So we are still receiving the bulk of funding, and that's driven by a number of things. Partly government initiatives. You know, we have London is not the only hub. We have Cambridge, Manchester, etc. And the government is deliberately investing in those areas to try and encourage businesses to locate not just in that southeast and that London area. And I think that's very encouraging. We've got great universities. We've got universities with very high reputation for technology and advancement. You know, we're one of the leading markets for quantum. Google has said we're putting 5 billion into the UK in the next 2 years. You know, Waltham Cross is going to be developed as a centre of excellence, and it's going to be the global centre for DeepMind. So things like that, and that background of technology, availability of talent, and you know the government initiatives that are there to kind of push tech companies forward, really still make us a very attractive place for startups to be. And also, whilst that does, as you rightly pointed out, make a bit of a saturated market in some cases, if you are innovating, there is a very adaptable market here and a buying market that recognizes those new technologies and will take them on where they have relevance and where they're seen to be potentially market leading and with strong ROI.
So I guess you really have to have your A game on, right? I mean, you need to be prepared for the market. You can't do it as kind of, you know, on the side. Okay, I'm doing pretty well in the US. Let's, you know, poke my toe in the water, or I have a great company in France. Let's call into the UK and see what we can do. I guess you're saying you really need to show commitment, differentiate, understand the competition, and your ideal customer profile, of course.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. That's not a unique thing to the UK. It's probably more sensible to have spent the time doing that when entering the UK. One could argue the same thing on somewhere like Germany, for example, where you know, access to Germany and German companies is really difficult. It's really challenging to get that voice there, that notice. So again, you have to look at your market. You have to know who you're going to target. You have to really work out what your low-hanging fruit looks like and how you're going to move up through. So I think any plan needs to take into account the fact that, you know, that you've got to have understood the competition, that you've got to have understood your USP. And I think it's fair to say, you know, you do still see a lot of mistakes being made, and we probably see this as a team across multiple geographies. You know, when I'm running one of our teams across France, Italy, and the UK, for example, there is still an underestimate if that company is coming from outside of Europe on. You just can't do it the same way you did it elsewhere, and you won't get the same results that you're getting in your home country necessarily when you're starting in a new one, because you've already got traction, you've already made some mistakes, but you're going to have to learn how to get traction and make mistakes in that new country as well. So I think any time spent pre-planning that, building your go-to-market strategy and understanding truly what you're chasing is going to help. And I mean, we've got so many tools available now to help us with that. All the AI stuff that's available out there to help you look at, you know, intent signals and that type of thing is all beneficial. And as you know, we deploy all of that for our customers as well.
So you mentioned AI. You know, many people probably don't know, but Google's DeepMind is originally a UK company, and I believe UK is you know, one of the leaders in AI. What can you say about AI and the companies you're seeing, the support there is, the ecosystem there for companies that are AI-based companies or AI-enabled companies?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I'd say about it. The first thing is, yes, the investment in AI tech in the UK is significant. You know, we do have Cambridge University, Oxford University, and a lot of market-leading AI sort of knowledge and talent. I think when I did the last look at this, you know, obviously, when you look at the investment in it, US, China, right? They're number one in the world. I don't know. I'm not going to even go which one's first and second. And to be honest, I don't actually know. But when you look at the countries that follow up, UK is normally in third. You've also got Canada and Singapore as well that are quite recognised. But you know, really, the UK very much is a place where AI is recognised as we recognise as being a talent pool for that. I think the other thing is that the government's also got their AI action plan in place. So that, again, is there to encourage investment in that sector, encourage products being developed in that sector, and encourage companies to come to the UK and you know, access that talent pool. So there's quite a few mechanisms there to make that happen. And I mean, that's one of the things that must have been part of the Google decision to invest the money they're going to invest over the next couple of years.
And how is that impacted by Europe AI regulations? Does that have any influence what's happening in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in that, so I'm going to be honest. What you do see is we do still follow very similarly a lot of the initiatives that are coming out of the EU, but we are no longer governed by some of that new regulation and that new law. So there is some flexibility to be able to, you know, look at us in isolation and say how for us now to build our own infrastructure and regulatory environment to encourage businesses to grow without allowing AI to run out of control. So I think there's a balancing act there. I'm going to be honest with you and say I'm not an expert in that side of things, but I do think we as a government and as a country, we are looking to encourage AI and see development of AI in things that do good but deliver benefit, etc. So we're not going to stand in the way of that development happening. There is still a requirement for AI and privacy and boundaries to be implemented, and I think we will go along with a lot of what comes out of the EU and out of the other leading countries in terms of, you know, looking at something that is developing so quickly that almost in some ways the regulatory infrastructure is lagging behind it. So I think we'll all be playing catch up on it. I don't think the UK is going to be any different, but I think it is about how you encourage companies to come here and take advantage of the talent pool that's the most important on that.
Okay. So I guess in summary, the talent pool is there, the big companies are there, the regulation is slightly easier than it is in mainland Europe because it's not impacted by the big AI regulation that's been put forth. You know, a lot of good rules protecting people and systems, but still you can probably work a little bit freely and have access to the European market from the UK for these types of technologies.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we can get access to the European market. Yes, there are some barriers. I mean, if I'm sending a computer to one of our team on the mainland, then yes, I have to fill out a lot more paperwork than I had to before Brexit, which is frustrating. But that doesn't have the same impact on technology companies and so on. So I think the ease of doing business, we haven't seen a dramatic change in that. Yes, there's more admin. Yes, there's more cost around it, but it hasn't necessarily seen a big downturn, certainly in the technology businesses that are coming in.
Well, I mean, you're mentioning hardware, right? So shipping physical hardware from the UK to Europe is hit because of Brexit. Shipping hardware from the UK to the US is hit by like tariffs, like everybody else. I guess they might be easier, but it's these two directions, Brexit and tariffs, has impacted digital services, SaaS, AI, less or really not at all at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And in fact, we're not part of the new Data Act either, which is part of the rule on the 2 months for SaaS and the exiting of SaaS contracts and so on. So there are some advantages to the digital infrastructure here, which is good. But yes, I mean, we have a 10% tariff with the States. We managed to get there slightly quicker than the EU. I'm not sure what the EU's is currently, but I believe it is back at 10% now, but I can't really remember. You sort of lose count with the blackboard that Trump walks out with every so often. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, that the other interesting thing is that, I've always taken the view that when you decide on a path, you can't look back at the other path and think that might have been prettier, more attractive, or more pleasant. Actually, all you can do is make the best of the path that you're on. And I think, even that infrastructure provides opportunity. And I mean, there's a great example of that. We've been working with a partner recently that is looking at how you set up for e-commerce companies going to the States out of the UK, an infrastructure within the US. Registering a company, which makes it easier to deal with product import and tariffs, and then having an actual distribution network through a third party and managing that whole setup and saying, here is your ready-made platform to trade in the US. So there are opportunities that come from those environments, I think, as well, that shouldn't be underestimated.
And what about other trade agreements? Does UK have special alignment with anybody else? We talked about what's happening in Europe and in the US.
Well, we're seeing an awful lot of interest from Canada. I'm having a lot of conversations with Canadian companies at the moment. There's an extension of the agreement with Canada that we have already. So that's a great route to market, or a great opportunity area. And the Canadians have two options. Many of the Canadians are French speakers, and they have, they can launch in the UK, they can launch in France, or both. So we've seen that's been quite interesting. We've just 2023, we signed a new free trade agreement with Australia and New Zealand that's resulted in some additional interest coming from those regions as well. And I think that's just going to be something we continue to do. The goal, I mean, we've got an agreement already signed with India that hasn't yet come into play. I'm not sure of the exact dates that it does, but again, that's going to just ease any of the friction that we've got in those which are all, I mean, every one of them is a big market in its own right. Okay.
So let's talk about a case study. Somebody who's come to you and said, listen, we want to enter the UK, or we want to enter Europe. We don't know where, we don't know how, let's, advise me on this. How do these conversations typically start? And then how do you select the UK and talk about some success stories?
Yeah, I mean, how does the conversation start? It's an interesting one. It normally starts as I want to double my business and get an unrealistic number within the next 6 months in this brand new market that I don't really know. And then there's always that conversation of setting the right expectation versus the one that the VCs are expecting them to achieve. So often there is a planning stage that we have to go through, and that planning doesn't need to be heavy. It does depend upon how developed the business is themselves. Not all of the companies that are coming into the UK or into Europe out of the US have necessarily won the US market yet. They've just got enough funding and they've got an appetite for growth, and they want to come into this market quickly before one of their competitors takes the market over or gains too much of a foothold. So in reality, I think, you know, there's always a difference with every company that we've got. You know, some of the smaller companies we work with, I mean, there was a good one recently where they have a tool which helps with managing the link between AI code and data in developing applications. And often what happens is in normal coding, you're going through the AI code. And I'm not an expert, I'm a salesman, so please forgive me with my description of this one. But you go through a sort of testing phase of the code, but you're always doing that independently necessarily of the underlying data. This looks at the whole picture. And one of the other things that happens with AI code is there are anomalies and there is bias that comes into that coding when you're asking AI to create code. It creates more lines of code than a normal person would write. It will do things like, say, between the ages of 5 and 65, and suddenly it says, it inserts a line because it's found something somewhere about the age of 43, which it's got an extra line in there. And this tool enables you to go through a process to clean all of that up. Now, interestingly, you know, they've had some initial success in the US, but when they came to the UK, we did actually sit down. They actually engaged a partner to do a go-to-market strategy for them. And then they're looking for us to support that execution underneath to test that go-to-market strategy. And that's a great example. Now, as you know, Rick, we've got people on the team that can help support that. This was a very in-depth process that they were going through with this particular partner. And, you know, potentially they then come up with an ICP. They come up with a proposition, they come up with, you know, a set of target audiences, and they need to understand what the market's saying in, you know, in the context of what they've put together. And they're mature enough, even as a small business, to know that each of the markets is probably going to have a different approach, different opinion, or a different requirement in terms of how they're pitched to it, even inside the verticals within the geography. So that's a great example of where, you know, you've got to spend that time doing that planning, and then you've got to execute to that plan, and then you've got to adapt that execution based upon the feedback. And that is also really where I think it's really important to look at how you engage partners, because even some of the bigger companies we deal with, I mean, we have a big payment provider across Europe, as you know, one of our biggest clients, and they have looked at our Salesforce implementation for lead generation, and they've gone, wow, we wish ours did that. And they're a huge organization that just hasn't got that kind of level of granularity to the data, because we've built that to be a best of breed engine for anybody that we're supplying it to. So again, I think, you know, you have to work with people or companies or teams that deliver you the insight you need to make those adaptive moves to really take on that market fast and to scale quickly.
And so what kind of teams did you build for this particular company?
That particular one, we're still in process. We haven't done anything. They're in that go-to-market, and we're talking to them.
But it could be lead generation, field sales, depending on...
It's going to start with lead generation messaging, and then that'll be founder-led sale from there. And then once that momentum builds, we will then layer in, and we're talking about layering in a two-tier team. One where we're focusing very much at the enterprise level with account execs, you know, those that maybe have the contacts within those key accounts, etc. And then an inside sales, which will be it's a lower value version of the product that then is opened up when you put it into an enterprise environment. So it could well be a two-tier sales. Again, we've got a lubricant manufacturer coming into Europe, where we're actually looking at two markets there, Germany and Italy, where they've already got some traction in Italy through a distribution model. And again, we're looking at lead generation to support the distributor. We're looking at inside sales to support the to support the sort of lower value, high volume sales, and then enterprise. And that's no different I mean, that happens to have been an Italian example, but we will go through exactly the same thing from a UK perspective based upon the individual client. And the difference here in the UK is, I think the UK market will accept an inside sales model often for higher value sales than some of the other markets in Europe. And that can be advantageous, particularly if you're needing to pull in technical pre-sales from outside of the region. You know, being able to do that in a environment like we're in right now, in a video environment, you know, that can be really helpful to get those early adopters and those early beachhead sales done to gain the momentum to drive forward more.
You mentioned an interesting point on founder-led sales versus, let's say, professional sales team or a sales team or a third-party sales team. Do you come across many companies that are founder-led in their home market or founder-led in the UK, and then bringing you in to be that first non-founder-led sales approach?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's a sweet spot for the type of business that we are, Rick, you know, and especially here in the UK, because we get a lot of people who, you know, you often find people who've built a piece of technology or a piece of software based upon the roles that they've had elsewhere or an idea that they've had. That enthusiasm that they bring to the table gets them so far. And even in the UK, that enthusiasm gets you so far, although we can be a bit, when it rains, we're a bit miserable. But it still will get you there. But when you want to actually start looking at how you scale that, you realize that a founder's enthusiasm for a product, their deep understanding of why they built that product or designed it or delivered it in the first place, how do you replicate that through into a sales team? And what we often find is that people are coming to us because they failed to do that. They've tried to do it with different sales models or different salespeople. And what they're looking for us to do is bring a maturity level to it, and then also to develop that repeatability of that process. And that really comes down to helping them refine that message. So yeah, I mean, definitely we see people who have reached a ceiling, and what they're coming to us for is to help them bust that ceiling and really understand, you know, is there a broader market for what they've got or not? And if there is, how do we get to it, and how do we get to it effectively? And I think that's a large part of what we're having to do. It's not just like buying a salesperson. We're actually having to develop that sales process, you know, it potentially even a methodology that sits over the top of it to enable that repeatability and then enable that faster scaling.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had a call today with a client who said, well, we're thinking about hiring, it was an international company, Asian company. We're thinking about hiring a person or providing somebody, you know, what's the difference? And, you know, just hiring somebody on their own in Europe is a lone wolf. Even with lead generation supporting that person is a struggle. So how do you find that person? How do you hire them? How do you train them? How do you engage them? How do you track their progress? How do you provide them the market feedback? How do you get reality what's happening in the market? How do you support that person from getting what they need from the company, right?
Yeah, 100%. And you know, and it's a lonely old job, and you're getting pulled from pillar to post. I mean, you know, it's one of the reasons I think if I had some of my time again, I definitely want to be there with somebody else helping support me in opening that market up and getting those second and third opinions. And what that does for anybody expanding here into the UK is, you know, whether they're coming from the US, whether they're coming from Europe, is having the infrastructure team in place at senior level to help with that process just minimizes the risk of failure at the end of the day. And that's the most
important. How long does it typically take?
That's expensive.
You mentioned, yeah. So there's a cost of failure. So you either you're not prepared, coming to us or coming to anybody or having your own team, or you hire the wrong person. Of course, that there's a cost of failure in time. But let's say the value proposition is good. They engage, they hire somebody, or they engage with us. What's the typical time between, you know, let's say you launch the UK January 1. What's the typical time that somebody should expect? A SaaS company, let's say mid-level enterprise, average contract value of $50,000 a year. How long should it take before they start seeing that first revenue?
I mean, you're going to get meetings in the first few months, but the quality of those meetings will improve over time. I think really typically that kind of mid-market 50K type offer, you're probably going to take 3 months to 6 months to build the momentum, and then 3 months to 6 months to 9 months to start closing those first deals. Now, that doesn't mean that the first deal is going to be in 12 months. What it actually means is those two things will dovetail in together, and you'll end up probably looking for the initial deals you want to do around that 6 to 9 months mark. That's probably realistic. Sometimes it can be faster than that. Sometimes it may be slower. It depends on the proposition as well, because if you've got something really innovative, you've got a brand new mousetrap, then you might find somebody who's looking to change right now or unhappy with the product that they've got, and that gives you that chance to win quickly. Great example of that was when we brought Livefyre over a few years ago, and we'd sold to Time Out within 3 months, and it was just great timing. They were looking for something like we were offering them. It was all about getting UGC onto their sites, and it was just good timing, good product, and a good team that managed to execute on that.
But I think even a step before that, right? Because we did pre-planning with Livefyre. We identified they could have sold to brands, but we identified newspaper publishers and magazines is the sweet spot, and we built a team around that, right?
Yeah,
and that's what we focused on. So walk us through this first kind of then 3 months or even the pre-planning to kind of get to that phase. Because I think that's really critical to the success of that account.
Yeah, I mean, we were well supported there. It was an experienced management team on their side, and they'd had really good success in the US into some really big publisher brands, so and well-known publishers. So that helped us with a baseline. We then spent time really understanding which publishers to target. And what we did there was, because we were bringing in comments and UGC online for these publishers, there was sort of a camp that part of the publishers was sitting in the camp of, oh my goodness, what are we opening up our website to in terms of content, versus those that was and do we not screen that content, versus those that were more open-minded and were perhaps the edgier publishers or whatever. So we really did spend time working on that. And then when we came to the process of identifying the team, we were looking for people with contacts and with experience in that sector, both in the marketing and UGC sector as well as the publishing sector, and that helped. And then the next phase of that was actually getting out there. We started by contacting people. We also did quite a big launch. We invited a lot of people to a launch event, brought the American execs over to talk about what it was, got some of their customers who had local presence here in the UK to be at that launch. We did like sort of a panel discussion and then drinks afterwards. And that was a really successful way of making a bit of a splash into the market. And then the momentum went on from there.
So at that point, I think that was around month 3 or 4, right? So we'd closed Time Out magazine as a first deal within 3 months. I guess we had a couple of we had you leading the team, a couple of AEs full time by that time. I think at least one sales engineer on the team. We had lead gen. I don't know if we had brought marketing on. So we
were utilizing the American, but we did bring in.
So we were building a full-time managed team focused on that vertical, still mainly focused on the UK.
Yep.
We did a UK launch, and they didn't have a UK office. They didn't have a UK team, but nobody really cared, right? We built the brand. We had.
Well, as far as they were concerned, as far as everybody was concerned, we are that UK team. I mean, that's the beauty of the model that we have, is that we are that presence. They didn't need a registered office in the UK because they could sign under their own paperwork. So all of that worked very seamlessly for them.
Yeah, because people also often, well, we need to open up an office, we need to register, we need to get the bank accounts, and we do all that. Let's choose Dublin or let's choose London. And it can be quite expensive and timely before they do all that. I mean, we took Livefyre to 10 million in revenue over 3 years, 10 full-time people with no UK office, right? No UK entity, no UK bank account, up to the Adobe, and we partnered with Adobe through that process, through the Adobe exit, right? Maybe talk a little bit about how that partnership went, that relationships with Adobe, pulling them in, collaborating on deals, and how that exit went then.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of they had invested in Livefyre in the US as had Salesforce, and so working with the Adobe team, we were effectively being brought into sales by the Adobe team, which also meant that the team themselves had got familiar with our own sales team. So when the final acquisition happened, it was almost a simple process for them to say, well, actually, we can bring these guys in, we can offer them full-time roles. They didn't have any worry. They were able to put them onto Adobe contracts as well, standard sales contracts, which was really good because they didn't have to do, we have this thing in the UK called TUPE, where you have to, when you take somebody on, you honor the terms and conditions that you take them on at. So they didn't have to renegotiate any of those terms and conditions. They basically were in a great position to be able to start fresh, but with a team that wasn't fresh. And that team went in and effectively became, specialists for that product as part of the wider Adobe.
Great. That was great. Great story. Great case study. Well, Kevin, thank you very much. It was a great session today. So everybody for starting late. StreamYard didn't like the CET versus GMT timing. It took us 10 minutes to figure that out.
Yeah,
but I think
we're a technology company, Rick. We should have been better.
We got on track. We're having more of these sessions. We're having our Italian team, our Nordics team, our German team coming on. So look forward to future sessions. And thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks for having us.